I just learned of this story over the weekend when my uncle Samuel was in town. He has always been a jokester, and growing up, he'd always been pulling pranks and laughing. I don't think that I had ever seen him so serious like I did that day. He's a huge car fan and asked to see my new Infiniti G37 sedan, so I took him out of my grandpa's driveway to show him the car with my dad. We did the usual pop the hood and rev the engine type stuff, and we all pretended that we knew what we were looking at as we stared into the hood of the car. And that's when my uncle decided that he wanted to tell us about something that happened to him in college. This is honestly the first time that I had ever heard him talk very seriously, with a tone of fear in his voice. He trembled as he first started telling the story. Said that he hadn't ever told anyone about this before, but seeing me with my new car and the fact that I'm a young guy made him want to bestow this knowledge upon me. My uncle went to a rural college. The campus was in the middle of a town of about 10,000 people. Most of those people were students or they worked at the college. He moved off campus his junior year and he lived about 3 miles outside of town and the bar districts. After having quite a few beers one night with his friends, he decided that he better walk home since he had an exam the next morning. As he was walking down the country road with cornfields on both sides of the road, a man in a truck pulled up who appeared to be a very friendly farmer. He offered to give my uncle a lift to save him the walk. My uncle, being drunk and not thinking straight, took him up on his offer. He got in the front seat and the car took off. He gave the man directions to the house he lived in with his college buddies, and then about 5 minutes into the drive, noticed that the man had gone past the turn that he needed to take. He informed the man that his house was behind them and that he needed to turn around now. But the older farmer said that he had lived in the town for 50 years and that he knew a shortcut that he could teach my uncle. That's when my uncle began to get suspicious. He started asking questions about the drive and surveying his situation. The farmer obviously had a final destination in mind as he continued down the road and then eventually pulled into an old driveway with a very old barn that was falling apart. My uncle said that the roof of that barn was halfway caved in. My uncle's plan was to bolt the second the man slowed down. So when the farmer slowed down and parked, my uncle pushed the unlock latch and gave the door a big shove. The lock had been sawed off and only a part of it popped up. At this point, he knew that he was in for it. The driveway was made of gravel and there was a very old playground set in the front yard that was completely rusted and falling apart. There was also a shed in the back of the property behind the barn that my uncle said had the lights on, unlike everything else in the property that was dark and only illuminated by the headlights of the truck and the moon. My uncle ended the story then, very abruptly, with, "Then I fought him off and I sprinted home." And he immediately just said that we should all go back inside the house. My dad just stared at him the rest of the night and he kept to himself. I don't think my dad wanted to admit it, but I know that something obviously happened at that farm. And something very bad. So yesterday I was at my sister's house with my mom watching my son and nephews play in the yard. One of my nephews, Harrison, was picking bark off a tree when I remembered an odd encounter that I had as a kid. I said, "So weird," out loud, thinking about the encounter. My mom inquired what I was talking about, so I told her. When I was a kid, I was hanging out at Pinecone Forest. I was picking bark off of one of the trees to pass some time, waiting for my friend Frankie to finish his homework and come out to play. Out of nowhere, it seemed that a guy came up to me. I could smell him before I saw him. He smelled like stale cigarette smoke. I was kind of scared when I looked at him. He wasn't very old, but he had a very lazy eye that was cloudy, and his teeth and fingernails were stained yellow. My mom had taught me to be nice to people, even if they didn't look like me, so I faked a smile and said hello.
"What are you doing?"
The smell of his breath was the worst.
I'm picking the bark off the tree.
"You shouldn't do that. It's like picking off the tree's skin. How would you feel if someone picked off your skin?"
he said, while lightly pinching my arm with his sharp yellow nails.
I don't know.
I replied and took my arm back. Just then, Frankie's mom called for me out the door and told me to come and wait inside. I didn't think anything of the whole thing at the time. When I told my mom about it, she had this look of, I don't know what it was, guilt maybe? She said that it was probably time that I knew the whole story. She thought that I had forgotten about the whole encounter, so she never brought it up to me. First, you should know that the rest of the neighborhood I grew up in was a small, tight-knit community. Everybody knew everyone, and there was no reason for an outsider to come unless they knew someone there. Anyway, here's what happened with this guy. Frankie's mom, Sonia, noticed a white van with no windows parked on the side of the road. She didn't recognize it, but figured that maybe it was a visitor for a neighbor. Sonia said, or rather told the police, that the van had been there all morning and afternoon. She was kind of keeping an eye on it. She said she just had a bad feeling. Her house had a huge window in front facing the pinecone forest, and the van was parked next to it. She saw me waiting for Frankie and kept a constant eye on the van while holding a phone just in case. She saw the man exit the back of the van and walk up to me. As soon as she saw him grab my arm and pinch me, she called the cops, and that's when she called me into her house. The cops stopped a guy just outside of my neighborhood. In the back of his van were binoculars, a Polaroid camera, and pictures of me, taped all over the walls of the car and ceiling. It was me at school, at my grandparents' house, at the bank with my mom, just me everywhere and everywhere I went. But that's not all. He had a key to a storage unit on him. Inside the unit, they found a cabinet full of knives. There were also a few anatomy books, obstetrical equipment, duct tape, and 10 empty 5-gallon buckets. In the middle of the unit was an old bed that was used to restrain mental patients, and the entire inside of the unit was covered in plastic wrap. I felt that I had to share this encounter because honestly, I never thought that I would experience something like this myself. That night was the day before I graduated from university, so I was determined to get an early night. I'd gone around to my friends for a smoke, but don't get me wrong, I'm not a pothead. It was more of a celebration, and I remembered that I had to take my mom to the hospital, so I went back home. It was nothing serious, but she had to be taken and picked up. I remembered that we'd rolled the joint in the car. It was a disaster because she'd smell and see it everywhere, so I made a mental note to stop and vacuum the car. We have a 24-hour petrol station really close to us, but it's sort of in its own and there are no houses or buildings around. I pull in and look over to the shop. They use a hatch after 12 and don't allow you inside, but I didn't need anything. It had just ticked over 4 a.m. and I had to be up at 10, so I wanted to just get this done and get out of there. The vacuum machine was behind the coal shed, but it was well lit. I cranked on some music on my phone and got to work. €1 for 4 minutes for vacuuming. Not bad, I thought. No one else was in the parking lot except one white van, but the guy inside was yelling wildly into his phone. Not loudly, just making a lot of gestures. I felt for him, probably some guy who has been driving all night, but hey, I cracked on with the work at hand. Then I looked over again and caught his eye. He looked away and I laughed. Love at first sight, I thought to myself. I was in an amazing mood. The summer sun was already starting to rise and the streetlights went out, including those illuminating the petrol station. It wasn't that dark, but it was noticeably creepier and I was keen to really get a move on. I stared over at the van and saw that the man was watching me again. Still talking on his phone, but then something happened that really freaked me out. I saw someone lean forward from the other seat and peek around the guy, then immediately slammed themselves back against the seat. That's when I realized that the guy on the phone was in the passenger seat and wasn't driving. I hadn't noticed it when I drove in, but I shrugged it off and set the vacuum cleaner back, ready to leave. I threw all my stuff back into my car and went to unlock the door when a voice said, "Excuse me?" I swear that I nearly shat myself there and then. My heart was absolutely pounding, but I recognized the voice. The petrol station was a Spar, the same chain of stores I work in, and the guy who'd spoken was my old supervisor. He'd moved to the 24-hour store not long ago. He began to shout at me for using the vacuum so late at night, and the two guys in the van just sat and watched us, as if waiting for him to go away. My old supervisor then said something that made the whole situation real.
I'm going to have to ask you to come inside with me.
We aren't allowed to let customers in past 11, even in stores that are open until 12. This is a big no-no, especially as I knew that I wasn't doing anything wrong. I allowed him to lead the way, and the moment we were in the store, he put the shutter down. He told me that he'd been watching the guys in the van, that they'd been sitting there for nearly 3 hours. Little did I know, my old supervisor saw someone get out of the back of the van, and as he described it, the man put a bit of masking tape across a few of the O's in their number plate, effectively creating a new plate. At this point, I began to panic. I looked outside and I noticed that the van was gone. After checking the CCTV, it was shown that they had sped away the minute I was taken into the store. We called the police and they examined what little footage was there. They took the tape and thanked us for bringing it to their attention. At one point on the CCTV, the guy who got out of the back of the van turned to get back in, and it looked like he had a knife in hand. I realize I sound dramatic, and the story isn't exactly thrilling, but I cannot imagine what would have happened if my old supervisor hadn't been looking out for me. And I'm never vacuuming at 4 a.m., that is for sure.